Imagine you're just staring at a completely flat digital image of a campfire on your laptop, and suddenly you can actually smell the wood smoke.
Right.
Or, you look at a high-resolution photo of a sliced lime, and before you even think about it, your mouth physically starts to water with that really sharp, phantom sour taste.
Oh, yeah.
And you aren't wearing a virtual reality headset. There are no, hidden chemical sprayers in the bezel of your monitor. The only thing interacting with your body is light.
Just light.
Light that is so perfectly engineered, so structurally complex, that it entirely bypasses your visual cortex and just directly hacks the other sensory pathways in your brain.
I mean, it sounds like science fiction, right? Or perhaps some highly controlled laboratory experiment. But it's actually the immediate future of consumer technology.
Yeah.
We are currently standing at the precipice of a complete paradigm shift in how digital devices interface with human biology.
And to understand how we get to phantom smells and hacked sensory pathways, we have to look at the screen you are probably staring at right now. Because that screen, whether it's an ultra-crisp smartphone, a tablet, or a massive flat-screen television, it's basically lying to you.
It really is.
It has been lying to you, your parents, and your grandparents. For over 80 years, the fundamental architecture of how we display digital information has trapped our perception. We're in this low-dimensional, highly compressed projection of reality.
It is arguably the most successful and universally accepted optical illusion in human history.
Wow.
We look at our digital photos and we think we are seeing a faithful reproduction of the light that bounced off our loved ones, or the sunset we captured, but we aren't.
We're seeing a trick.
We are looking at a biological proxy, a very clever trick that was invented out of absolute necessity decades ago, and we simply accepted it because, well, we didn't have the computational power to do anything else.
But that computational power has finally arrived. Today, we're pulling from a deeply reported and incredibly dense article by William L. Weaver. It was published today, May 18th, 2026, and it's titled Breaking the RGB Barrier.
A fascinating read.
It really is. Our mission for this deep dive is to explore how a burgeoning technology known as multi-primary color, or MPC, is finally shattering this 80-year-old illusion.
Yeah, we are talking about moving from a flat, compressed projection to a high-dimensional active reconstruction of the physical world.
Okay, let's unpack this, because Weaver's piece makes it abundantly clear that this shift is not just about aesthetics, right?
No, not at all. This isn't some marketing gimmick where a TV manufacturer promises, slightly deeper blacks or more vibrant greens so you can enjoy your movies a tiny bit more.
Right.
The breaking of the RGB barrier fundamentally alters how we perceive digital truth. It changes how our autonomic nervous systems respond to digital stimuli and, as we'll see later in the discussion, how artificial intelligence physically measures the molecular reality of our universe.
So let's start with the illusion itself, because I really want to make sure I understand the mechanics of the lie before we talk about how it's being fixed.
Makes sense.
The article refers to this as the RGB prison, RGB standing for red, green, and blue. If you zoom in close enough on any screen right now, you just see millions of tiny red, green, and blue dots.
Yep, just those three.
Why those three colors? Why did we build our entire digital world on that specific foundation?
Well, to answer that, we have to travel back to the 1940s. We have to look at the early pioneers of color television, people like the Mexican engineer Guillermo González Camarena.
Okay.
He patented a sequential tricolor adapter back in 1940. He, along with other brilliant engineers of that era, were trying to solve a massive physics and bandwidth problem.
Getting color through the airwaves.
Exactly. They wanted to transmit moving color images over radio frequencies. But sunlight, the natural light that illuminates our world, contains a massive, continuous spectrum of electromagnetic wavelengths.
Like an infinite gradient of color.
Right. And you cannot practically transmit an infinite continuous spectrum of data over a 1940s radio frequency, nor could early cathode ray tubes physically reproduce it. So they didn't try to reproduce reality.
What do they do instead?
They decided to exploit a vulnerability in human biology instead. They looked at the human retina.
Right, the rods and cones in the back of the eye.
Yes. Human vision is essentially trichromatic. The vast majority of us have 3 types of photoreceptor cone cells in our retinas. These cones are sensitive to short, medium, and long wavelengths of light.
Which match up with the RGB.
Roughly, yeah. Though not perfectly, they correlate to what we perceive as blue, green, and red. The engineers of the mid-20th century realized a profound biological shortcut. You do not need to show the human eye the full spectrum of reality.
You just need to trick the cones.
Exactly. You only need to stimulate those 3 specific cones in the correct ratios, and the human brain will just hallucinate the rest of the colors.
Okay, I want to make sure I have the right mental model for this. So if I'm looking at a bright yellow school bus in real life, the paint on that bus is absorbing and reflecting a very specific complex wave of physical light that hits my eye.
Correct.
But if I look at a picture of that school bus on my phone isn't actually creating yellow light, is it?
No, not at all.
It's just shining a very specific intensity of red light and green light right next to each other. And my brain says, oh, red and green cones are firing together. I guess I'm seeing yellow.
That is precisely how it works. You are not seeing the physical reality of yellow light. You are seeing a biological proxy created by 2 narrow bands of red and green.
It's like imagine going to hear a master violinist play Stradivarius.
Okay, I like this analogy.
The sound you hear is incredibly complex. It has resonance, the friction of the bow on the string, the acoustics of the wooden body. It's an entire spectrum of acoustic data that's real light.
Right.
But what my screen is doing is more like a cheap digital synthesizer. It just plays 3 raw electronic notes at different volumes to kind of mimic the shape of the violin sound. It tricks the ear into recognizing the tune, but all the deep acoustic data is just missing.
That is a much better way to look at it, actually. The digital synthesizer is playing an approximation. And for decades, the technology industry knew this was a compromise.
They knew it was a cheap trick.
Oh, absolutely. They knew they were trapped in this 3-note approximation. But whenever they tried to add more notes, whenever they tried to break out of the RGB prison and add a 4th or 5th primary color to screens, they slammed into a massive, unyielding mathematical wall.
And Weaver refers to this in the text as the metamerism wall.
Yes. Metamerism.
This is a crucial concept in the article, but the physics of it really threw me for a loop. Did you break down what metamerism actually is and why it broke early televisions that tried to use it?
Sure. So metamerism is an optical phenomenon. In the simplest terms, it's when 2 entirely different physical sources of light, 2 entirely different spectral power distributions, trigger the exact same biological response in your eye's cone cells.
So 2 different recipes of light that look absolutely identical to human biology.
Yes. The text uses a great phrase to describe this. It calls it surface-level equivalence, masking deep structural divergence in light.
That's a mouthful, but it makes sense.
Basically, your eyes see 2 identical shades of yellow, but the actual photons hitting your retinas are behaving in fundamentally different ways.
So our eyes are just easily fooled then.
They are easily fooled under static conditions, but things get incredibly chaotic when the ambient environment changes. And Weaver uses a phenomenal real-world example to illustrate how fragile these metameric illusions are.
Oh, I think I know where you're going with this.
Do you remember the dress phenomenon from 2015?
Oh, how could I forget? The entire internet grinding to a halt over a blurry photo of a dress. Half the world, myself included, saw it as undeniably blue and black.
Yep.
The other half swore it was white and gold. Friendships were practically ruined over this thing.
It was a massive cultural moment, for sure, but it was also a massive real-world demonstration of metamerism failure. To understand why people saw 2 entirely different color palettes, you have to understand a process called chromatic adaptation.
Chromatic adaptation.
That our brains evolved to perceive the true color of objects regardless of the time of day or lighting.
Meaning, like a red apple should still look red whether I'm looking at it under a bright blue midday sky or under the warm orange glow of a sunset.
Exactly. Your brain is constantly running an automatic white balance calculation. It looks at the ambient light in the environment, and it subconsciously subtracts that light from the object you are looking at to find the true color underneath.
Okay, so how does that explain the dress?
Well, the photo of the dress was notoriously overexposed and taken under highly ambiguous lighting conditions. When people looked at that image on their RGB screens, the screen was providing an ambiguous, low-dimensional metamer.
Right.
It wasn't the real light of the dress, it was the digital synthesizer version. Because the digital light was structurally hollow, the brain had to guess the ambient lighting context.
So if my brain unconsciously assumed the photo was taken outside in the shade, which has a blue tint, my brain automatically subtracted blue from the image.
Exactly.
And if you subtract blue from that specific RGB mix, you are left with white and gold.
Correct. But if another person's brain unconsciously assumed the photo was taken indoors under a bright, warm, yellow incandescent bulb, their brain subtracted yellow.
And when you subtract yellow from that image, you see blue and black.
Right. The RGB approximation lacked the deep structural data of the real light, forcing a metameric interpretation based on the viewer's biological guesswork.
Yeah, it is fascinating. So the RGB screen doesn't give our brain enough data to anchor the reality of the image? But if that's true, why didn't we just fix it?
Well, we tried.
Yeah, I remember in the early 2000s, there were those sharp Quadron televisions that advertised a fourth color. It was yellow, I think. If we knew RGB was structurally hollow, why didn't adding yellow or cyan just fix the problem? Why did they hit a wall?
Because of the exponential explosion of mathematical possibilities. In a standard three-color RGB system, creating a specific color is a relatively straightforward algebraic equation. You have three variables.
Okay.
But when you start adding a fourth, fifth, or sixth primary color to the hardware, the mathematical redundancy skyrockets.
I need an example. How bad does the math actually get?
Weaver breaks down the numbers. Depending on the color depth of the system, when you add extra primary colors, you create a massive coordinate space. You suddenly have anywhere from 1 million to 1 billion physically distinct spectral combinations that are capable of producing one identically perceived color on the screen.
Wait, 1 billion?
Yes, up to a billion.
You're telling me that if a television with 6 primary colors wants to show me a specific shade of sky blue, it has a billion different combinations of its internal LEDs to choose from to make that one blue?
Yes. There are a billion different metamers available for that single pixel. Now think about the hardware inside a television from the early 2000s.
Oh boy.
It has to decide which of those 1 billion recipes is the correct one, and has to do that for every single pixel on the screen. There are over 8 million pixels on a modern 4K display.
That's a lot of math.
And it has to perform that calculation 60 or 120 times every single second to maintain a smooth frame rate.
Oh, I see the problem. The processor would just instantly melt.
Traditional silicon processors simply could not handle mapping that massive coordinate space in real time. They choked on the math.
So what do they do?
They would default to rigid, pre-programmed lookup tables that resulted in terrible, artificial-looking colors. The RGB barrier wasn't a failure of optical engineering. It was a limitation of raw, brute force computing power.
I see.
The hardware could emit the light, but the brain of the television couldn't solve the unmixing equations fast enough.
So we've been living with the RGB synthesizer because it was the only math our processors could actually carry the weight of. But Weaver's article is titled Breaking the RGB Barrier, which implies the wall has come down.
It has.
How did we solve a math problem that requires a billion calculations per pixel per frame?
We didn't solve it by building a faster traditional processor to crunch the billion calculations. We solved it by discarding the traditional mathematical formulas entirely.
Okay, so a totally new approach.
Yes. We moved away from algorithmic calculation and embraced artificial intelligence, specifically neural rendering engines.
Okay, I am stuck here. If the pixel doesn't know what color recipe it's supposed to use out of a billion choices, how does an AI guessing make it any more accurate?
It's a vital distinction. The AI is not guessing blindly.
Isn't it just hallucinating a pretty lie instead of a cheap lie? How is that closer to reality?
These neural networks are trained on unimaginably massive data sets of real-world spectral environments. They aren't just trained on photographs, they are trained on hyperspectral scans of physical reality.
Oh, wow.
They learn the underlying physics of how light actually interacts with matter.
So the AI learns what the structural divergence actually looks like in the real world.
Exactly. When the neural rendering engine receives an old, low-dimensional RGB signal, say a standard digital movie file, it doesn't calculate every possible path to render it on a multi-primary screen.
Right.
It uses what Weaver calls gamut-aware mapping and generative priors. It instantly predicts the most natural, structurally sound primary mix in microseconds.
It's just intuitively.
Yes. It intuitively knows the correct recipe because it recognizes the context of the image based on its training on physical light.
So if it sees an RGB approximation of a sunset, it doesn't just try to mathematically translate the red and green pixels. It says, I have been trained on 10 million physical sunsets. I understand the atmospheric scattering of light through dust particles.
Exactly.
Therefore, the most structurally accurate way to deploy these 6 primary colors to recreate that specific atmospheric effect is this exact combination.
Yes. And it interpolates the colors between the colors beautifully. In traditional digital video, you often see banding or clipping. You know, those ugly, jagged stair-step transitions and shadows or gradients, where the computer simply doesn't have the vocabulary to describe the color between dark gray and slightly less dark gray.
Oh, yeah, I hate when that happens on streaming video.
Right. Gamut-aware mapping eliminates that. The AI uses the extra primary colors to create gradients that are mathematically indistinguishable from a continuous analog wave.
That's incredible.
But making the picture objectively smoother is just the foundational layer. Weaver introduces a concept here that completely recontextualizes the relationship between the user and the device. He calls it the isomorphic shift.
Isomorphic shift.
Okay.
Isomorphic generally means having the same form or structure. But in the context of this article, he says the original object remains the same. A red apple is still a red apple, but the mathematical description of it becomes richer and highly individualized.
Very highly individualized.
Wait, highly individualized. Here's where it gets really interesting. Are you saying the AI isn't just generating the best possible image for the room? It's actually changing the mathematical light recipe for my specific eyeballs.
It is entirely bespoke to the observer. And this is why it is a true paradigm shift. Until now, every screen you have ever purchased operated under the assumption that your eyes are standardized factory parts.
Which they obviously aren't.
Far from it. My cone cells might have peak sensitivities at slightly different nanometer wavelengths than yours. As a person ages, the physical lens inside their eye begins to yellow, naturally filtering out certain blue wavelengths.
Right.
The density of macular pigment in the retina varies wildly from person to person, which changes how they perceive high-frequency light. An RGB screen doesn't care about any of that. It blasts the exact same signal to everyone.
It's like an off-the-rack suit. It's tailored for an imaginary average person, which means it doesn't fit anyone perfectly.
A fantastic analogy. Multi-primary color driven by AI is a master tailor operating in real time.
Wow.
The AI can dynamically search through those millions of available metamers and select the precise structural combination of light that maps most cleanly to the visual cortex of the specific individual watching the screen. It's actively compensating for the unique biological quirks and degradation of their specific visual system.
That is deeply profound. It means I am seeing a version of reality perfectly tuned to me, but logistically, I am lost again.
Okay, where did you lose the thread?
If my television or my laptop screen is meticulously tailoring the light specifically to the yellowing of my lens or the exact sensitivity of my cones, how on earth does it know what my biology is doing? I didn't plug a biometric sensor into my eyeball before I sat down on the couch.
You didn't have to. The biometric sensor is already looking at you.
Wait, really?
It's the standard forward-facing camera on your smartphone, the integrated webcam embedded in the bezel of your laptop, or the sensor array built into your smart television.
My webcam. My webcam is just taking a standard 1080p video of my face on calls.
Yeah.
How is it pulling highly specific biometric data about my visual cortex from that? It sounds incredibly invasive.
It is highly invasive, but not in the way we traditionally think of surveillance.
Right.
The AI isn't trying to recognize your face to sell you something, at least not primarily.
Then what is it looking for?
It is monitoring physiological feedback loops. It is using high-resolution computer vision to look for microscopic biological indicators of cognitive load, visual fatigue, and autonomic arousal. Weaver outlines two primary markers that the hardware relies on. The first is pupillary dilation.
Pupillary dilation, the pupil getting bigger or smaller. But my pupils just dilate based on how bright the room is, right? If I turn out the lights, they get big to let more light in. If I walk into the sun, they shrink.
That's true.
How does that tell the AI how to tune the colors?
Because your pupils do much more than just regulate light. They are directly wired to your autonomic nervous system. They are emotional mirrors.
Really?
Yes. The pupillary light reflex handles the gross adjustments for brightness. But overlaid on top of that are minute involuntary fluctuations driven by your sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system.
The fight or flight and rest and digest systems.
Precisely. Your pupils involuntarily dilate, meaning they widen when you experience positive emotional arousal or intense cognitive engagement. If you gaze at a loved one, or if you look at an undeniably cute image, Weaver uses the classic internet example of a huddle of kittens, your brain releases a cascade of neurotransmitters that causes the smooth muscle in your iris to contract, widening the pupil. The camera registers that submillimeter change in real time.
So the webcam measures the exact diameter of my pupil and says, aha, the user is experiencing positive emotional engagement with this visual stimulus.
Yes. Conversely, your pupils constrict, they tighten when you are faced with a sudden threat or a stressor.
Oh, like if a spider jumps out on screen.
Exactly. If a spider crawls across the wall or a snake slithers through the grass in a video game you're playing, your pupil tightly constricts to increase your depth of field, giving you maximum visual acuity to assess the danger.
Wow.
The AI tracks this dynamic ebb and flow of arousal and stress second by second and adjusts the light output to either soothe the visual pathway or sharpen it based on your biological reaction.
Okay, that is wild. So marker 1 is the expansion and contraction of the pupil acting as a mood ring for the AI.
Yeah.
What is marker 2?
Marker 2 is even more granular and, frankly, more startling: microsaccades.
Microsaccades. Saccades are eye movements, right? So these are micro movements.
More microscopic, rapid, and completely involuntary tremors of the eye. Even when you believe you are staring perfectly still at a single pixel on your screen, your eyes are constantly violently jittering on a microscopic scale.
Why? That seems like a massive biological design flaw. If I want to hold my arm perfectly still, I can. Why can't I hold my eyes still?
Well, if you actually held your eyes perfectly still, you would go blind within a matter of seconds.
Wait, what? Explain that.
It's a phenomenon known as Troxler's fading. The photoreceptors in your retina operate on a chemical cycle. If they are exposed to the exact same static visual stimulus without any variation, the chemical response quickly depletes and the photoreceptors stop firing signals to the brain.
So they just shut down.
The image literally fades out into a gray void.
So if I stared at a red dot perfectly still, the red dot would just disappear.
Entirely. The microsaccadic tremors exist to constantly shift the visual image across a slightly different set of fresh photoreceptors, continuously refreshing the chemical cycle and keeping the image visible.
That's amazing. I had no idea.
But evolutionary biology rarely single tasks. While these tremors are keeping the lights on, they are also acting as a subconscious, high-speed visual tracking sentry.
A sentry? Like an automated security sweep.
Exactly. Because your peripheral vision is actually quite poor at resolving sharp details, your brain uses these microscopic tremors to constantly dart toward potential points of interest in the environment. It's trying to detect edges and anomalies before your conscious mind is even aware of them.
Oh, I see.
Weaver notes in the text that these tremors will instinctively point toward incredibly subtle visual cues, the glint of a concealed weapon under a jacket, or a micro-expression of physical injury on a person's face, microseconds before your conscious, higher-level processing actually analyzes the scene.
Let me make sure I'm grasping the scale of this. You are telling me that the webcam built into my standard consumer-grade laptop is sensitive enough to track microscopic, involuntary eye tremors that indicate what my subconscious primitive lizard brain finds interesting or threatening before I, the conscious human being, even know what I'm looking at.
That is the level of precision we are dealing with. The software maps your attentional vector.
So my laptop webcam can see my eye twitch and know I'm distracted. That sounds like having a teacher staring over my shoulder. It feels incredibly invasive. It's one thing for an algorithm to know what links I click on. It's another thing entirely for the machine to know what my subconscious is prioritizing.
Yeah.
How does the software actually use that information? Does Weaver give a practical example?
He does, and it highlights exactly how the boundary between user and machine is dissolving. Let's say you are reading a dense technical document on an MPC-enabled monitor. The system is tracking your microsaccades. It establishes a baseline for what your eyes look like when you are deeply engaged in reading. Suddenly, the system detects a shift. Your microsaccades begin to drift off target. The frequency changes. The algorithm instantly flags this as an attentional drift.
So it knows I'm zoning out, my eyes are scanning the words, but my brain is thinking about what I want for dinner.
Precisely. And rather than just passively observing this, the software actively intervenes. Weaver describes a scenario where the operating system might playfully emote a prompt, a subtle visual animation, or a pop-up that effectively says, "Eyes up here," to gently pull your cognitive focus back to the critical zone on the screen.
Eyes up here.
Yeah.
Wow. That is, honestly, it's a little terrifying.
It is a bit much.
It might be dressed up as a playful productivity tool, but what it really means is that the machine knows my level of attention better than I do, and it is taking active steps to correct my biological behavior.
And that profound intimacy, the undeniable reality that a screen can read your biometrics with extreme precision and adjust its light to alter your state, leads us directly into the most concerning section of Weaver's article.
The dark side of it all.
The dual-use nature of this technology. If a system has the fidelity to perfectly tailor light to soothe your retinas, it possesses the exact same hardware capabilities to do the opposite.
Right. Because if it can read my biology to fix a picture, it can read my biology to manipulate me. We are talking about weaponized light.
Weaver categorizes this under the umbrella of affective computing.
Affective computing. That's a very sterile academic term. What does that actually look like in practice? Are we just talking about color psychology?
Right.
Because we already have that.
Well, it goes deeper than that.
Right, because fast food restaurants use bright red and yellow to make us eat faster and leave. Hospitals use pale green and blue to calm patients down. What makes this different?
Traditional color psychology relies on broad psychological association. It is a suggestion. You see red, you associate it with urgency or heat. But affective computing, driven by multi-primary displays, shifts the paradigm from psychological suggestion to direct biophysical modulation.
Direct modulation.
Yes. They're using ultra-pure, narrow-band wavelengths of light to completely bypass your conscious cognitive processing and directly target deep subcortical structures in your brain.
Bypass conscious processing.
Oh,
so I
yeah.
can't think my way out of it. If I know a restaurant is trying to make me hungry with red walls, I can consciously say, I see what you're doing. I'm not going to order the fries. But you're saying with an MPC screen, I don't get a vote. It just hacks the hardware directly.
You do not get a vote. Weaver breaks down specific biophysical pathways that can be targeted. Let's look at the implementation of specific hyperpure blue primaries.
Okay, let's hear it.
The display can emit an incredibly narrow band of blue light that is specifically calibrated to target intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells.
Okay, intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells. I'm going to need you to unpack that. Let's just call them IPRGCs, like the article does. What are they and what do they do?
Earlier, we talked about the rods and cones that allow you to see shapes and colors. IPRGCs are fundamentally different. They are non-image forming cells located in the inner retina. They do not help you see the world visually.
So what's their job?
Their primary evolutionary purpose is to act as light meters to regulate your circadian rhythm, their internal biological clock.
So they just measure how bright it is outside to tell my brain if it's day or night.
Exactly. And they do this because they contain a unique photopigment called melanopsin. Melanopsin is highly sensitive to very specific short wavelength light, specifically the crisp blue light of a morning sky.
Oh, I see where this is going.
When the IPRGCs are hit with that specific wavelength, they send a signal directly to the suprachiasmatic nucleus in your hypothalamus, which instantly suppresses the production of melatonin in the pineal gland.
Melatonin being the hormone that makes us feel sleepy and prepares the body for rest.
Yes. So imagine you are doom scrolling on a social media app late at night. The platform's algorithm wants to maximize your engagement. It wants to keep you clicking ads for another hour. In the past, they would try to do this by showing you a highly inflammatory headline or an incredibly engaging video. It was a psychological hook.
But with an MPC screen.
With an MPC screen, the application can silently instruct the display to subtly shift its spectral output. It introduces a microscopic, barely perceptible dose of that hyperpure blue primary directly targeted at the absorption peak of your melanopsin.
Wow.
The IPRGCs fire, the signal hits your hypothalamus, your brain slams the brakes on melatonin production, and your central nervous system is biologically forced into a state of cognitive alertness.
You literally cannot feel sleepy, no matter how tired you actually are, because the screen is pumping biological daylight directly into your neurochemistry. That is incredibly dark.
Very much so.
And that's just blue light.
Does the article mention other ways they can hack the autonomic nervous system? It does. Weaver dedicates a portion of the text to what he ominously calls anxiety zones.
Anxiety zones? That sounds like a terrible place to be.
It is entirely physiological. By deploying specific narrowband reds or sickly desaturated yellows, the screen can trigger immediate autonomic stress responses.
Wait. Yellow light can cause a stress response?
When it is narrowed down to the exact nanometer wavelength associated with certain evolutionary threats, like the specific hue of decaying organic matter or venomous markers, yes, the display bypasses your rational brain.
Unbelievable.
You don't look at the yellow and think, that's scary. The light hits your retina and your sympathetic nervous system engages before you have a conscious thought. Your heart rate elevates. Your blood pressure spikes. And crucially, It alters your skin conductance.
Skin conductance, meaning it makes me sweat.
Yes, galvanic skin response, a microsweat response triggered by autonomic arousal.
So what does this all mean? If an advertising firm or a political campaign or a social media platform can literally pump anxiety-inducing yellow light into my retinas to make my heart race, trigger a biological stress response, and lock my attention onto their specific product or message, how is this legal?
That's the big question.
How do we protect ourselves? Do we just stop looking at screens entirely? Do I need to wear specialized sunglasses while I check my email?
This raises an important question, and it is a massive ethical minefield. Weaver acknowledges that. He frames this as a battle for our visual biosovereignty.
Biosovereignty. The right to own and control the autonomic responses of our own bodies is a fantastic term. But how do we enforce it against light?
Weaver argues that outright resistance or Luddism isn't the answer because we aren't going to abandon digital technology. Instead, he proposes a nuanced, software-level solution called Affective Alerts. It operates on a tiered system of consent and transparency.
How would an effective alert actually work in practice?
It would act as an operating system-level dashboard or a transparency overlay, similar to how your phone currently warns you if an app is trying to track your location or use your microphone.
Okay, I'm familiar with those prompts.
Users might willingly accept mild, passive sensory modifications by default.
For example?
You might allow your word processing software to use soothing, low-impact workspace hues that actively keep your blood pressure down and reduce eye strain while you write a stressful report. You consent to that biological modulation because it benefits you.
Okay, I am entirely fine with my spreadsheet calming my nervous system down.
But the operating system would actively monitor the spectral demands of the applications. If the system detects a website, an advertisement, or a video attempting to shift the display into a state of high-intensity, aggressive physiological modulation, if it detects an application requesting that anxiety yellow or the insomnia blue, the operating system intercepts it.
It throws up a firewall.
Exactly. It would flash an active warning, perhaps a persistent icon in the corner of the screen, or a pop-up that essentially says, "Warning, this advertisement is attempting to utilize narrowband frequencies designed to elevate your heart rate and suppress melatonin. Allow or block."
Oh, I see.
It forces the hidden manipulator out into the open, turning it back into an optional tool.
It restores agency to the user.
I like that.
But as mind-bending as the physical manipulation of hormones and heart rates is, Weaver's article takes an even stranger turn in the next section.
Yes, it really does.
If light can physically change the rhythm of my heart, what else can it trick my biology into doing? We move from physical manipulation to something that borders on actual sensory hallucinations.
Yes, cross-modal perception.
Cross-modal perception, meaning one sense triggering another. This was the part of the text that honestly sounded like magic.
It relies on the deep, interconnected architecture of the human brain. Our sensory pathways, vision, olfaction, gustation, audition, are not perfectly isolated silos. They crosswire and share neural real estate, especially in regions like the superior colliculus and the insular cortex.
Neural real estate, I like that.
Because of this, presenting a visual stimulus with an absolutely perfect, high-fidelity spectral signature can actually induce pseudosensory experiences in entirely different domains.
So seeing a color so perfectly, with such structural accuracy, that it triggers a totally different sense. Weaver gives some incredibly specific, visceral examples in the text. He mentions a perfectly calibrated smoky gray on an MPC display triggering the distinct olfactory memory of wood smoke.
Think about the implications of that. You are sitting in a sterile, climate-controlled office, looking at a flat piece of glass emitting engineered light, and you suddenly smell the sharp, distinct scent of a campfire in your nose.
And he also mentions a specific, highly saturated lime primary. He says that when this specific green wavelength is dialed in perfectly, it can induce a phantom sour taste in the mouth. Just by looking at the green light, how is that possible? I'm not putting anything on my tongue.
It happens because the multi-primary color display can hit the exact ultra-pure nanometer wavelength associated with the physical reality of a lime. When your visual cortex receives a signal that is that structurally perfect, not the cheap RGB synthesizer version, but the master violinist version, it triggers the associated neural network so powerfully that the brain essentially overrides its own logic.
Wow.
The brain concludes, if the structural data of this light is this undeniably perfect, the object must be physically present, therefore I must be tasting it. It forcibly activates the gustatory cortex.
It's like inducing synesthesia on demand. Synesthesia being that fascinating neurological condition where people naturally hear colors or taste words or see sounds. Their pathways are naturally cross-wired. But you are saying this technology can force anyone, regardless of their natural neurobiology, to experience a synesthetic event. I can look at a digital lime and actually feel the saliva pooling in my mouth from the sourness. But beyond just neat parlor tricks or a really intense grocery delivery app making me crave citrus, where is this actually going to be utilized?
Weaver points directly toward the future of the entertainment industry. He coins the phrase emotive digital cinema.
Emotive digital cinema. Moving beyond IMAX and 3D glasses.
Far beyond IMAX. IMAX is spectacular, but it is ultimately just a larger, louder projection of the exact same flat, low-dimensional RGB illusion.
Right, it's still RGB.
Emotive digital cinema represents a fundamental shift in the medium. We are talking about theaters designed to entertain consenting viewers by actively adding extra-dimensional sensory experiences directly into their biological pathways.
Consenting viewers is the operative phrase there, especially after our discussion about biosovereignty and manipulation.
Absolutely. You buy a ticket knowing exactly what physiological ride you are signing up for. Imagine sitting down to watch a heart-pounding action thriller. The director doesn't just rely on fast cuts and loud bass to make you tense.
Okay, what do they do?
The screen itself is actively modulating its spectral output to synchronize with the protagonist's biometric state. It pumps narrowband frequencies into your retinas to elevate your heart rate and trigger microsweats right before the car chase begins.
Or a blood-curdling horror movie. The monster isn't even on screen yet, but the director is painting the shadows with that anxiety yellow and deep autonomic triggering reds. The audience is experiencing a literal cold sweat and a profound biological feeling of dread purely from the ambient light.
Or, conversely, a romance film that utilizes soothing, warm, multi-primary mixes and specific visual cues designed to trigger pupillary dilation and parasympathetic relaxation. It literally forces your biology to feel warm, open, and relaxed during an emotional scene.
That's insane.
It completely shatters the classical, rigid boundaries of sight and sound. The cinematic experience becomes a fully multi-sensorial reality, constructed entirely from intelligently manipulated, structurally perfect light.
That is profound. It's the ultimate empathy machine. The director isn't just showing you how a character feels. They are biologically forcing you to feel it with them.
Exactly.
But up until now, this entire conversation has been deeply anthropocentric. We've only been talking about human eyeballs, human hormones, and human experiences. Weaver's article takes a massive, fascinating pivot in the final section. As mind-bending as the human applications are, the implications of breaking the RGB barrier go far beyond the limits of human biology.
We shift our focus from subjective human perception, which is flawed and easily hacked, to the realm of objective analytical truth. This takes us into the world of biomimetics and synthetic sensors.
Right, because as incredibly complex as the human eye is, the article makes a pointed argument that human vision is actually remarkably limited. We are, functionally speaking, relatively blind to the environment's true spectral complexity. We only see a tiny, narrow sliver of the reality happening around us.
We are what physicists would call broadband samplers. The three cones in our eyes take massive, messy chunks of the electromagnetic spectrum, average all of that complex data out, and compress it into a simple signal of red, green, or blue.
Just a blur of data.
It's an evolutionary shortcut that kept us alive, but it discards a massive amount of data. But machines, artificial intelligence, and synthetic sensors do not have to be limited by the evolutionary constraints of primate biology.
No, they don't.
The push in hardware engineering right now is towards synthetic biomimetic sensors, essentially. Artificial eyes that utilize 7, 9, or even 13 primary color receptors.
So we are moving from a biological broadband sampler to a synthetic narrowband discriminator. Let me break that down. Instead of taking a huge chunk of light and averaging it out into red, the machine is slicing the incoming light into incredibly fine, surgically precise slivers.
Exactly. And this is where the 9-color synthetic sensor becomes utterly revolutionary, particularly for artificial intelligence and scientific research, because a 9-color sensor completely shatters the metamerism barrier we spent so much time discussing earlier.
I see. Because with 9 highly tuned sensors looking at incredibly narrow bands of light, the biological illusion falls apart. Going back to our earlier math analogy, the human eye sees 5 plus 5 and 8 plus 2 and just registers the number 10.
Right, metamers.
They are metamers. They look identical. But the 9-color sensor doesn't just see the 10. It has the resolution to see the individual 5s, the 8, and the 2.
Beautifully conceptualized. Let's look at a practical laboratory example. You have two complex chemical compounds sitting in beakers. To an RGB sensor, like the camera on your phone, or to a human eye, both liquids might look like identically clear water or identically vibrant red dyes.
They're perfect metamers.
But a laboratory AI, equipped with a 9-color synthetic sensor, looks at those two beakers and instantly, effortlessly differentiates them.
Because it can see the structural divergence.
Yes, because those two chemicals, despite looking the same on the surface, possess distinct narrow-band absorption peaks. They interact with light at a molecular level in uniquely different ways that the human eye completely averages out and misses. The AI can see the exact chemical signature of reality.
So the machine can literally see the chemistry of the world. And Weaver goes into the quantum mechanics of why the number 9 is so mathematically crucial here. This section of the text was incredibly dense, and frankly, I had to read it 3 times. Let's really break down this quantum connection. Why 9 dimensions? Why not 8 or 10?
To understand the significance of the number 9, we have to look at the fundamental architecture of atoms, specifically how electrons orbit the nucleus. In quantum mechanics, electrons do not orbit in simple flat circles like planets around a sun. They exist in complex 3-dimensional probability clouds called orbitals.
Right, the electron clouds.
And these orbitals are categorized by a sequence of subshells, which physicists label with the letters S, P, D, and F. What is fascinating is that the number of distinct spatial orientations, the degrees of freedom for each of these subshells, follows a strict mathematical progression of odd numbers.
Okay, odd numbers. Walk me through the progression.
The p orbital is perfectly spherical. It has 1 degree of freedom. It is symmetric from all angles. The p orbitals look like dumbbells aligned along the x, y, and z axes. They have 3 degrees of freedom.
1, then 3.
The d orbitals are more complex, looking like 4-leaf clovers, and they require 5 degrees of freedom to describe mathematically. The f orbitals are even more intricately bunched, requiring 7 degrees of freedom, so the progression is 1, 3, 5, 7.
1, 3, 5, 7. A simple, elegant mathematical staircase.
Exactly. And the next theoretical step up that staircase, the next level of electron complexity, is the g orbital. And following the math, the g orbital requires exactly 9 dimensions, or 9 degrees of freedom, to solve the complex wave equations, specifically the spherical harmonics that define its geometry.
The g orbital. But do things with a g orbital actually exist in our daily lives?
They do not exist in the ground state of any naturally occurring element on the periodic table. You won't find a g orbital sitting in a block of iron or a tank of oxygen. However, they are absolutely vital in the realm of advanced computational chemistry when modeling excited states.
Excited states, meaning when an atom has absorbed a massive amount of energy and its electrons jump up to higher, highly unstable energy levels.
Yes, and this is critical when studying theoretical chemistry, specifically things like superactinides.
Superactinides. These are the elements at the very, very bottom of the extended periodic table, right?
Yeah. The hypothetical elements past atomic number 121. They are so incredibly heavy, and their electron configurations are so massively complex due to relativistic effects that they mostly exist only in complex mathematical models, or for fleeting fractions of a second inside massive particle accelerators.
Wow.
To understand how these theoretical elements bond, how their electrons correlate, you have to be able to map the 9-dimensional geometry of the g orbital.
Okay, I think I am finally putting the pieces together. Giving an artificial intelligence a 9-color synthetic sensor isn't just about taking a slightly sharper photograph. We are literally giving the machine the exact number of mathematical coordinates, the 9 degrees of freedom it needs to solve the unmixing equations of excited electron states. We are essentially building a synthetic super eye for machines to solve complex unmixing equations.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that is exactly what is happening. A 9-color sensor provides the AI with a physical interface that mirrors the mathematical complexity of higher dimensional quantum states.
That's just wild.
It allows the machine to perceive a higher dimensional truth that is entirely invisible to human biology. And Weaver points out that the engineering isn't stopping at 9.
He mentions the hardware pushing toward 13 or even 15 primary dimensions in the near future.
Yes. By utilizing these hyperdimensional sensors in tandem with AI models trained for generative prior denoising, which is essentially the algorithmic ability to clean up massive amounts of chaotic sensor data to find perfectly clear, pristine signals and cross-modality translation, we are systematically dismantling the artificial limits of observation.
truly breaking the barriers.
We are no longer constrained by the biological limitations of our primate eyes, nor are we constrained by the crude RGB approximations we invented in the 1940s. We are building the tools necessary to perceive the universe exactly as it physically, chemically, and mathematically is.
Maximum truth. That is the exact phrase Weaver uses at the end of the text, the quest for maximum truth.
It perfectly encapsulates the endeavor. This technological leap is not about adding more colors to a consumer television screen or making a smartphone camera slightly more vibrant. It is fundamentally about expanding the dimensions of what is empirically knowable in our universe.
This has been an absolutely incredible, exhausting, and mind-expanding arc to follow today. Let's take a moment to summarize the massive journey we just went on.
Good idea.
We started by unmasking an 80-year-old delusion, realizing that the screens we look at every day are just low-dimensional red, green, blue synthesizers built to accommodate the limitations of mid-century cathode ray tubes and early silicon processors.
We then traveled through the impenetrable mathematical wall of metamerism and saw how artificial intelligence, using neural rendering and gamut-aware mapping, allowed us to finally leap over that wall with isomorphic structural precision.
We look deeply into the slightly terrifying, highly intimate reality of screens that actively look back at us, utilizing our webcams to read our microscopic pupillary dilations and the involuntary microsaccades of our eyes to seamlessly gauge our subconscious emotional and cognitive states in real time.
We confronted the dark, dual-use ethical minefield of affective computing, exploring how ultra-pure, narrow-band light can be weaponized to suppress our melatonin or trigger autonomic stress responses, necessitating a completely new legal and software framework for visual biosovereignty.
We explored the wild, hallucinatory frontier of cross-modal perception, learning how a structurally perfect wavelength of light can bypass the visual cortex and forcibly make you smell a campfire or taste the sourness of a lime, paving the way for a fully immersive, biologically modulating emotive digital cinema.
And finally, we transcended the messy, limiting biology of the human body altogether, examining how nine-dimensional synthetic eyes are allowing artificial intelligence to map the quantum chemistry and excited electron states of the universe in a relentless quest for objective maximum truth.
And this is exactly why this dense, complex topic matters to you, listening right now. The screens you interact with for hours upon hours every single day, the smartphone in your pocket, the monitor on your desk, the massive television in your living room, are ceasing to be passive panes of glass.
They really are.
They're actively shedding their status as mere display devices. They're on the verge of becoming incredibly active, hyper-intelligent, and physiologically intimate participants in your biological, emotional, and cognitive reality.
The traditional rigid boundary between the observer and the observed is entirely collapsing. The tool is now reading and modulating the user.
It truly is, which leaves us with a final, deeply provocative thought to mull over as we close out. A thought that builds on the logical extreme of everything we've laid out for us today.
Lay it on us.
As our digital displays become fundamentally perfect, as they become capable of inducing phantom smells that are sharper than real life, phantom tastes that are more potent than actual food, and autonomic physiological responses that are perfectly curated for maximum emotional impact, at what point does the digital reconstruction of reality become more viscerally, physically felt than actual physical reality itself?
It is the ultimate existential question of this new era. If the digital stimulus is engineered to be chemically and structurally purer and significantly more targeted than the messy, chaotic stimuli of nature, the human body's biological response will inevitably be stronger to the machine than to the world.
Exactly. If an MPC screen can make you taste a lime better than a real lime can, which reality will we ultimately choose to live in? It seems that the 80-year-old low-dimensional RGB projection we've been living with was just the waiting room. The real multisensory show is just beginning.